Section 15 of Bede's Ecclesiastical History of England. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jonathan Lang. The Ecclesiastical History of England by the Venerable Bede. Translated by A.M. Seller. Book 3, Chapter 22. How under King Sigbert, through the preaching of Cedd, the East Saxons again received the faith, which they had before cast off. 653 A.D. At that time also the East Saxons, at the instance of King Oswy, again received the faith, which they had formerly cast off when they expelled Mellitus their bishop. For Sigbert, who reigned next to Sigbert surnamed the Little, was then king of that nation, and a friend to King Oswy, who, when Sigbert came to the province of the Northumbrians to visit him, as he often did, used to endeavour to convince him that those could not be gods that had been made by the hands of men, that a stock or a stone could not be proper matter to form a god, the residue whereof was either burned in the fire, or framed into any vessel for the use of men, or else cast out as refuse, trampled on, and turned into dust. That God is rather to be understood as incomprehensible in majesty, and invisible to human eyes, almighty, eternal, the creator of heaven and earth, and of mankind, who governs and will judge the world in righteousness, whose eternal abode must be believed to be in heaven, and not in base and perishable metal. And that it ought in reason to be concluded that all those who learn and do the will of Him by whom they were created will receive from Him eternal rewards. King Oswy, having often, with friendly counsel, like a brother, said this, and much more to the like effect, to King Sigbert, at length, aided by the consent of his friends, he believed, and after he had consulted with those about him and exhorted them, when they all agreed and assented to the faith, he was baptized with them by Bishop Finan, in the king's township above spoken of, which is called At the Wall, because it is close by the wall which the Romans formerly drew across the island of Britain, at the distance of 12 miles from the eastern sea. King Sigbert, having now become a citizen of the eternal kingdom, returned to the seat of his temporal kingdom, requesting of King Oswy that he would give him some teachers to convert his nation to the faith of Christ, and cleanse them in the fountain of salvation. Wherefore Oswy, sending into the province of the Midland Angles, summoned the man of God Cedd, and giving him another priest for his companion, sent him to preach the word to the East Saxons. When these two, travelling to all parts of that country, had gathered a numerous church to the Lord, it happened once that Cedd returned home, and came to the church of Lindisfarne to confer with Bishop Finan, who, finding that the work of the gospel had prospered in his hands, made him bishop of the nation of the East Saxons, calling to him 2 other bishops to assist at the ordination. Cedd, having received the episcopal dignity, returned to his province, and pursuing the work he had begun, with more ample authority built churches in divers places, and ordained priests and deacons to assist him in the word of faith and the ministry of baptism, especially in the city which, in the language of the Saxons, is called Ithenchester, as also in that which is named Tilleberg. The first of these places is on the bank of the Pant, the other on the bank of the Thames. In these, gathering a flock of Christ's servants, he taught them to observe the discipline of a rule of life, as far as those rude people were then capable of receiving it. Whilst the teaching of the everlasting life was thus, for no small time, making daily increase in that province to the joy of the king and of all the people, it happened that the king, at the instigation of the enemy of all good men, was murdered by his own kindred. They were 2 brothers who did this wicked deed, and being asked what had moved them to it, they had nothing else to answer but that they had been incensed against the king, and hated him, because he was too apt to spare his enemies, and calmly forgive the wrongs they had done him upon their entreaty. Such was the crime for which the king was killed, because he observed the precepts of the gospel with a devout heart. But in this innocent death his real offence was also punished, according to the prediction of the man of God. For one of those nobles that murdered him was unlawfully married, And when the bishop was not able to prevent or correct the sin, he excommunicated him, and commanded all that would give ear to him not to enter this man's house, nor to eat of his meat. But the king made light of this command, and being invited by the noble, went to a banquet at his house. As he was going thence, the bishop met him. The king, beholding him, immediately dismounted from his horse, trembling, and fell down at his feet, begging pardon for his offence. For the bishop, who was likewise on horseback, had also alighted. Being much incensed, he touched the prostrate king with the rod he held in his hand, and spoke thus with the authority of his office: I tell thee, forasmuch as thou wouldest not refrain from the house of that sinful and condemned man, thou shalt die in that very house. Yet it is to be believed that such a death of a religious man not only blotted out his offence, but even added to his merit, because it happened on account of his piety and his observance of the commands of Christ. Sigbert was succeeded in the kingdom by Sweethelm, the son of Sexbald, who was baptized by the same Cedd, in the province of the East Angles, in the royal township called Rendlesham, that is, Rendel's dwelling. And Ethelwald, king of the East Angles, brother to Anna, king of the same people, received him as he came forth from the holy font. Chapter 23. How Bishop Cedd, having a place for building a monastery given him by King Ethelwald, consecrated it to the Lord with prayer and fasting, and concerning his death. 659 through 664 A.D. The same man of God, whilst he was bishop among the East Saxons, was also wont oftentimes to visit his own province, Northumbria, for the purpose of exhortation. Oidilwald, the son of King Oswald, who reigned among the Deiri, finding him a holy, wise, and good man, desired him to accept some land whereon to build a monastery, to which the king himself might frequently resort, to pray to the Lord and hear the word, and where he might be buried when he died, for he believed faithfully that he should receive much benefit from the daily prayers of those who were to serve the Lord in that place. The king had before with him a brother of the same bishop, called Caelin, a man no less devoted to God, who, being a priest, was wont to administer to him and his house the word and the sacraments of the faith, by whose means he chiefly came to know and love the bishop. So then, complying with the king's desires, the bishop chose himself a place whereon to build a monastery among steep and distant mountains, which looked more like lurking places for robbers and dens of wild beasts than dwellings of men, to the end that, according to the prophecy of Isaiah, in the habitation of dragons, where each lay, might be grass with reeds and rushes; that is, that the fruits of good works should spring up where before beasts were wont to dwell, or men to live after the manner of beasts. But the man of God, desiring first to cleanse the place which he had received for the monastery from stain of former crimes by prayer and fasting, and so to lay the foundations there, requested of the king that he would give him opportunity and leave to abide there for prayer all the time of Lent which was at hand. All which days, except Sunday, he prolonged his fast till the evening, according to custom, and then took no other sustenance than a small piece of bread, one hen's egg, and a little milk and water. This, he said, was the custom of those of whom he had learned the rule of regular discipline. First, to consecrate to the Lord by prayer and fasting the places which they had newly received for building a monastery or a church. When there were 10 days of Lent still remaining, there came a messenger to call him to the king. And he, that the holy work might not be intermitted on account of the king's affairs, entreated his priest Cynibill, who was also his own brother, to complete his pious undertaking. Cynibill readily consented, and when the duty of fasting and prayer was over, he there built the monastery, which is now called Leistingo, and established therein religious customs according to the use of Lindisfarne, where he had been trained. When Cedd had for many years held the office of bishop in the aforesaid province, and also taken charge of this monastery, over which he placed provosts, it happened that he came thither at a time when there was a plague, and fell sick and died. He was first buried without the walls, but in the process of time a church was built of stone in the monastery in honour of the Blessed Mother of God, and his body was laid in it, on the right side of the altar. The bishop left the monastery to be governed after him by his brother Ceda, who was afterwards made bishop, as shall be told hereafter. For, as it rarely happens, the four brothers we have mentioned, Cedd and Cynibill, and Caelin and Ceda, were all celebrated priests of the Lord, and two of them also came to be bishops. When the brethren who were in his monastery in the province of the East Saxons heard that the bishop was dead and buried in the province of the Northumbrians, about 30 men of that monastery came thither, being desirous either to live near the body of their father, if it should please God, or to die and be buried there. Being gladly received by their brethren and fellow soldiers in Christ, all of them died there, struck down by the aforesaid pestilence, except one little boy, who is known to have been saved from death by the prayers of his spiritual father. For being alive long after, and giving himself to the reading of Scripture, he was told that he had not been regenerated by the water of baptism. And being then cleansed in the laver of salvation, he was afterwards promoted to the order of priesthood, and was of service to many in the church. I do not doubt that he was delivered at the point of death, as I have said, by the intercession of his Father, to whose body he had come for love of him, so that he might himself avoid eternal death, and by teaching offer the ministry of life and salvation to others of the brethren. Chapter 24. How, when King Penda was slain, the province of the Mercians received the faith of Christ, and Oswy gave possessions and territories to God for building monasteries, as a thank offering for the victory obtained. 655 A.D. At this time King Oswy was exposed to the cruel and intolerable invasions of Penda, king of the Mercians, whom we have so often mentioned, and who had slain his brother. At length, compelled by his necessity, he promised to give him countless gifts and royal marks of honour greater than can be believed, to purchase peace, provided that he would return home, and cease to waste and utterly destroy the provinces of his kingdom. The pagan king refused to grant his request, for he had resolved to blot out and extirpate all his nation, from the highest to the lowest, whereupon King Oswy had recourse to the protection of the divine pity for deliverance from his barbarous and pitiless foe, and binding himself by a vow, said, "If the pagan will not accept our gifts, let us offer them to him that will, the Lord our God." He then vowed that if he should win the victory, he would dedicate his daughter to the Lord in holy virginity, and give 12 pieces of land whereon to build monasteries. After this he gave battle with a very small army. Indeed, it is reported that the pagans had 30 times the number of men, for they had 30 legions drawn up under most noted commanders. King Oswy and his son Alfrid met them with a very small army, as has been said, but trusting in Christ as their leader. His other son, Egfrid, was then kept as a hostage at the court of Queen Kinwise, in the province of the Mercians. King Oswald's son, Oidilwald, who ought to have supported them, was on the enemy's side, and led them on to fight against his country and his uncle, though during the battle he withdrew, and awaited the event in a place of safety. The engagement began. The pagans were put to flight or killed. The 30 royal commanders who had come to Penda's assistance were almost all of them slain, among whom was Ethelhere, brother and successor to Anna, king of the East Angles. He had been the occasion of the war, and was now killed, having lost his armies and auxiliaries. The battle was fought near the river of Windwade, which then, owing to the great rains, was in flood, and had overflowed its banks, so that many more were drowned in the fight than destroyed in the battle by the sword. Then King Oswy, according to the vow he had made to the Lord, returned thanks to God for the victory granted him, and gave his daughter Elfled, who was scarce a year old, to be consecrated to him in perpetual virginity, bestowing also 12 small estates of land, wherein the practice of earthly warfare should cease, and place and means should be afforded to devout and zealous monks to wage spiritual warfare, and pray for the eternal peace of his nation. Of these estates, 6 were in the province of the Deiri, and the other 6 in that of the Bernicians. Each of the estates contained 10 families, that is, 120 in all. the aforesaid daughter of King Oswy, who was to be dedicated to God, entered the monastery called Herutu, or the Island of the Heart, at that time ruled by the Abbess Hilda, who 2 years after, having acquired an estate of 10 families, at the place called Strianesshalch, built a monastery there, in which the aforesaid king's daughter was first trained in the monastic life, and afterwards became abbess, till at the age of 59 the Blessed Virgin departed to be united to her heavenly bridegroom. In this monastery she and her father Oswy, her mother Eanfled, her mother's father Edwin, and many other noble persons are buried in the church of the holy Apostle Peter. King Oswy concluded this war in the district of the Luides, in the 13th year of his reign, on the 15th of November, to the great benefit of both nations. For he delivered his own people from the hostile depredations of the pagans, and having made an end of their heathen chief, converted the Mercians and the adjacent provinces to the grace of the Christian faith. Diuma was made the first bishop of the Mercians, as also of Lindsey and the Midland Angles, as has been said above, and he died and was buried among the Midland Angles. The second was Ceolach, who, giving up his episcopal office before his death, returned into Scotland. Both these bishops belonged to the nation of the Scots. The third was Trumhere, an Englishman, but educated and ordained by the Scots. He was abbot of the monastery that is called Ingetlingum, and is the place where King Oswin was killed, as has been said above. For Queen Eanfled, his kinswoman, in expiation of his unjust death, begged of King Oswy that he would give Trumhere, the aforesaid servant of God, a place there to build a monastery, because he also was kinsman to the slaughtered king, in which monastery continual prayers should be offered up for the eternal welfare of the kings, both of him that was murdered and of him that commanded the murder. The same King Oswy governed the Mercians, as also the people of the other southern provinces, 3 years after he had slain King Penda, and he likewise subdued the greater part of the Picts to the dominion of the English. At this time he gave to the above-mentioned Bede, son to King Penda, because he was his kinsman, the kingdom of the southern Mercians, consisting, as I said, of 5,000 families, divided by the river Trent from the northern Mercians, whose land contains 7,000 families. But Bede was foully slain in the following spring by the treachery, as is said, of his wife, during the very time of the Easter festival. 3 years after the death of King Penda, the Mercian chiefs, Iman, and Aepha, and Eadbert, rebelled against King Oswy, setting up for their king Wulfhere, son to the said Penda, a youth whom they had kept concealed, and expelling the ealdormen of the foreign king, they bravely recovered at once their liberty and their lands, and being thus free, together with their king, they rejoiced to serve Christ the true King, for the sake of an everlasting kingdom in heaven. This king governed the Mercians 17 years, and had for his first bishop Trumhere, above spoken of. The second was Jaruman, the third Ceda, the fourth Winfrid. All of these, succeeding each other in order, under King Wulfhere, discharged episcopal duties to the Mercian nation. End of section 15.